I met the love of my life, Mick. Well, we're about to get married. Then all of a sudden he tells me, hey, we need to push up our wedding just 2 more weeks. All I need is 2 weeks, babe. I'm about to go to a business conference and my boss won't let me change the date. Well, I said, okay. Turns out he was not going to a business conference. He was having an affair behind my back, and guess who it was with? My mother.
I come from a family of 3. Well, we used to be 4 till the unfortunate happened. My dad is a consultant doctor who had several drugstores scattered amongst the city. He made sure my mother, brother, and I were well taken care of. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. She chose to, and my father never bothered about it. It was to his advantage, actually. He rarely came home because my mom would wear him out with her constant nagging, and there was always an emergency surgery at one of the hospitals where he served as a consultant anyways. And my mother, who was supposed to take care of my younger brother and me, did a poor job of it. We would often have male visitors in the house, and my mother would either send my junior brother to me, to our room, or she would take them to hers. It did not take long before my brother and I knew what my mother was into. We could not speak up for her of what my mom would do to us. Besides, there was really no one to speak to about it. Things went on that way till one day, when my mom received a male visitor. She locked herself into her room with the visitor as usual, and warned against any form of disturbance from us. My brother and I were already used to this memo, so we did not plan on disturbing. We were just in the garden playing when my younger brother, who was asthmatic, began gasping for breath. It was not the first time he would be having that experience, and so I knew what to do. I ran into the house and grabbed his inhaler, but it turned out it was finished. If my mom had paid close attention to us, she would have known and gotten a replacement on time. I was too young to go to the drugstore to get a new one, so I did the only thing which a child in crisis would do: call out for his mother. I ran to the room where my mother was busy having her fun with her lover and began banging on the door. After about 5 minutes or so, the door flung open and my mom was ready to pounce on me for interrupting whatever it was she was doing inside there with her visitor. But my demeanor told her something serious happened. I didn't want her to take a guess. I simply screamed out my younger brother's name and ran out while she followed. We all got to my brother, who was lying unconscious. She checked his inhaler. It was in fact empty. My brother was rushed to the hospital where he was pronounced dead on arrival. My heart was broken beyond words when my mother came home crying without my younger brother. I was 10 years old at the time, but I had enough sense to know I had just lost my only brother. I intuitively began to cry. My mom seemed broken by it all, and I wondered why. After all, it was her carelessness and negligence as a mom that had led to her son's death. If she had even opened the door the moment I knocked, we may have saved my brother's life. My dad rushed home as soon as he got the message, and my mother suddenly began to attack him. She claimed he was never around and just left the upbringing of my brother to me and her. She said if he were around, my younger brother would not have died while she was trying to get him an inhaler from the drugstore. What a dirty lie. My father apologized and tried making amends by giving in to my mother's demands. As regards him coming home, it didn't change much. Though he would pick me up from school and all, he still avoided home as much as possible because my mother was not giving to give him any peace. Things moved back to normal for my mother after a few months. She soon began receiving these same visitors. The whole thing hurt me because this was the very lifestyle that had robbed her of her son. I thought my dad was the saint in the whole picture till my mom caught wind of his adulterous lifestyle as well. As you can imagine, it was quite dramatic, but I won't bore you with the details. My mother, who was hypocritical, took advantage of the situation. She filed for divorce from my father. My father was so sorry he cheated on my mom, but he was equally tired of the marriage, so he didn't make any attempts to save it. He was willing to grant my mother her wish. Well, my parents were going to head to court now, and where my mother played the victim card. She claimed my father had been unfaithful and neglected her, and my brother and me. Well, she won the judge over to her side with the portrayal of herself as the betrayed wife and a grieving mother. a situation she blamed on my dad's unfaithfulness. If only I was a witness for my father. If only my father knew he was not the only guilty one in the whole thing. The case was judged in favor of my mom. She won the custody of me, and my father was required to split his property in two, while paying alimony and child support. I spent the rest of my life with my mother, though, and my father tried his best to be present in it. I did not blame or judge him for what he's done, as I knew better. My mother and I lived in the same house, but we were not close. She just used my brother's death and my father's infidelity to enrich herself. Separating from my father, it was the avenue she needed to run wild. She resumed her escapades with younger lovers and would not respect the fact that I was around, just witnessing it all. The whole thing put some distance between us, and she simply did not care. I didn't even talk to my dad or anyone about it. Well, I got admission to college, and I spent most of my time in school. I graduated from college and moved out of my mother's house the moment I got a job that paid me really well. It was during this time that I met Mick. Mick was a surveyor, a handsome one, I might add. I had cold feet about men, dating, and family after my parents' drama. But Mick was smooth with his words. He knew his way around women, and it was not difficult for him to establish a rapport between the both of us. The more we got deeper and closer, the more I fell for him. We officially began dating, as he was the perfect companion I've never had. He proposed to me exactly 6 months later. I was initially not sure what to do. This was not a question of love. I know I loved him, but I was just scared. All the same, I said yes after I gave it some thought, and he introduced me to his family, and I was to do the same. The only parent who I was a little bit close to was my father, who would check up on me now and then, and that was the person I introduced Mick to. Mick was aware my parents were divorced, but he wasn't aware of the resentment I held towards my mother. He found it questionable that I introduced him to my dad and left my mom out of the picture completely. I was left with no other choice but to explain to him that my mom was not the perfect example of a mom. I told him about the kind of life that she led and noted that I could introduce him to her. The next thing would be my mother dragging my fiancé with me. Well, Mick laughed it off very hard and just assured me of his commitment to us. As regards for my mother, he said he would not judge her, as he too once had a, relationship with older ladies. His case was different. He no longer led that kind of lifestyle, and I finally decided that I would introduce him to her during my engagement party, which was coming up. A party I never intended on inviting her to in the first place. I wanted to send my mom a text or give her a call just to tell her about my engagement party, but Mick suggested it was not an honorable thing to do, as she was still my mother regardless of the life that she lived. I was forced to reluctantly pay my mother a visit. There's no point stating what I was there and what I saw there, as it was not something new or even unexpected. The party day finally arrived. Both of the families were present, and my father came alone even though he was seeing somebody. But my mother came with her younger lover, who was around my age, maybe even less. It was embarrassing making introductions to my in-laws. My mom gave herself off as, a dirty woman. I watched out for any flirtatious signs she could have made at a man, but I didn't see any. Mick and I made an announcement about our wedding date being 2 weeks from that day. Everyone was so happy for us. My mother later approached me to help plan my wedding. I did not want my mother anywhere close to my wedding planning, and there was every tendency that she could ruin it for me. I declined her offer by telling her I had everything all planned out already. I turned to leave when she told me that she was going to be absent from my wedding. Well, it was good news to me, but I knew it would make folks raise an eyebrow as to why my mother, the bride, was absent on the day of her daughter's wedding, so I asked what would make her absent. To my utter amazement, my mother said she already had a trip planned to Vegas. How silly can one get? Your only child's wedding's coming up, and you would rather skip it for a trip to Vegas, huh? Well, I get the fact that her trip had already been fixed before the date for my wedding was made public, but hey, it's my wedding. Not enough reason to make her ship her trip. Any parent with common sense would do that. The funny thing is my mom has been living off of the alimony which my father was required to pay and has faithfully been so. She has no known business, which implies that her Vegas trip was not for business, it was simply for pleasure. I stood for a while, thinking about how I would explain to my fiancé, his family, and my friends that my pleasure-seeking mother was off in Vegas with some young dude. And that was the reason she could not make it to my wedding. The only word that came out my mouth was, "Okay." I turned and left. I was not disappointed as I no longer expected much from my mother, and I had a sensible parent who would cancel their pleasure trip for their only child's wedding. But my mother is far from sensible. She has proven over time to be stupid to the letter. I was angry, though, because her absence, which was okay by me, would cause me great embarrassment when I had to answer to my guest. The party ended and Mick and I left for his home. I had moved in with him already, and I told him about the conversation I had with my mom at the party. He seemed disappointed in my mom, but avoided talking about it completely. He asked if I was willing to postpone the wedding so it could fit into my mom's schedule, but I refused. My mom was not that important to me. I didn't even want her in my life, to be honest, much less in my wedding. Besides, I'd gone far with the wedding preparations and all, and Mick did not oppose me. He was okay with whatever decision I took. I was forced to shift my wedding to a later date when Mick came back home the next day and told me so. Well, I was confused, as I've made my stance about the issue clear to him just the previous day, and he seemed okay with it then. It didn't make sense that he was now asking that we push it further. Well, I obviously asked the reason why, and he said it's because he was going on a field trip to Michigan on the very day we were supposed to get married. I struggled to make sense of the whole thing. His boss and colleagues were at our engagement party the previous day, and they heard us announce our wedding is in 2 weeks, and they all seemed happy. And he had consulted with his boss before we even fixed the date. His boss had even promised to give him a 1-month leave, which was to start a week before our wedding. It simply did not make sense and felt off. It was either his boss was bipolar and had forgotten our prior arrangement, or he was deliberately against our happiness. Well, I asked Mick to let me talk to his boss, but he claimed it would make him look weak. He even said he had attempted to reach a compromise with his boss about the whole thing, but the project was something this company had been fighting to get for some time, and his boss insisted he was there. I did not know what to do. There was no other alternative. We just had to shift the wedding further, otherwise we would have a wedding ceremony without the groom. I began calling everyone to inform them that we've moved the wedding 2 weeks from the original date. I did not call my mother, though. She had already made up her mind to not come to the wedding, so, She called me later that day to say she heard the wedding date's been shifted. She said she was aware I was hurting, but asked that I be patient since it was just 2 weeks further. This was not a piece of advice from a heart that cared, though, and I could hear the sarcasm right there in her voice, and she was probably calling just to rub it in my face that my wedding has been shifted. Mick went on his field trip while I made the necessary readjustments to fit it into our wedding. I had not heard from Mick since 2 days after he left the home. I tried reaching out to him, but his life was the mobile device, and it was switched off. I stopped calling after a while as I had the understanding he was in the field working or something important, and I did not know the conditions of things over there. It soon became imperative that I called him when there was a need as regards to our wedding planning, so I reached out to one of his colleagues who were friends with us. The moment I asked Mick's colleagues about him, he was taken aback. He said he was supposed to be the one asking me the question, as Mick's leave of work had begun a week ago. Well, I argued with him that he must be mistaken, as Mick was a 1-week field trip which the boss had sent him on, and His response showed he did not know any trip whatsoever. I knew somebody must be lying. I moved down to his office to see his boss, and it became crystal clear who the liar was. Neither Mick's boss nor his colleague had any idea where he was. I felt so darn stupid. I didn't know the whereabouts of my fiancé, who was supposed to be my husband, in just a few days. I went back home and waited for Mick to come back. He did so, 5 days before our wedding, and I acted like nothing happened. I asked him, "Honey, how was the field trip?" He said it was great and the project had begun just like he expected. He apologized for not being reachable, as the network situation in the region where he stayed was very bad. I acted like I bought his excuse, and I waited for him to go to bed that night before going through his things. Well, my aim was to check his passport for his latest flight destination. My discovery was shocking. Mick had gone for a trip as he said, but the destination was in fact not Michigan. It was Las Vegas. My mind began playing things like, my man had just cheated on me a few days before our wedding. I could not sleep at all that night. I waited for the day to break, and I served Mick his breakfast, and while he was at it, I directly asked how his time in Las Vegas had gone. His meal could no longer pass through his throat, as his ears heard my question, but his brain did not register. Mick came clean. He thought the fact that I was aware he was in Las Vegas and not Michigan, as he claimed, meant I knew the intricate details of his trip, which I did not. So, he just went ahead to start apologizing left and right. He started his statement with my mom made him do it. My heart began racing fast as he called my mom. He even confessed having an affair with my mother in the past, and though he had moved on, she threatened to expose their previous affair if he did not go on a 1-week fun-filled trip with her. You see, she had not planned the trip until she saw he was my fiancé at the engagement party. I was absolutely wounded. My mother had dealt me a serious blow, a blow that would be difficult to recover from. Well, she had blackmailed my fiancé into traveling with her on the day that was supposed to be our wedding, and she called me to mock me when she said that it had been postponed and she heard about it. I know we're not close, but how can a mother do this to her own child? I left Mick's place after the discovery, and I'm currently staying at a hotel. If it is 4 days till what's supposed to be my wedding, and I'm still thinking about what to do. Guys, I need advice. What would you do if you were me? What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. Oh my goodness. This story is absurd. If you think it's crazy so far, with a mother having an affair with her own daughter's soon-to-be husband, strap your seatbelts in because these updates are wild. I'm coming at you guys with 4 complete updates. If you're new to the channel, make sure you take a second right now. Hit that subscribe button underneath this video. It really supports me, and that way you'll never miss an upload. Here is update number 1, and prepare yourself. You might be mad at me for saying this, but it would not make sense to lie in my updates. The wedding's still going to be held in 2 days. I know most people would be of the opinion that I was to call off the wedding. The usual question would be, how would you still go ahead to get married to someone who used to be your mother's lover and cheated on you a few weeks before your wedding? I know, I must seem like a fool, but I'd carefully thought things through, and maybe you could understand my reason after hearing me out. I stayed in the hotel for 1 day, analyzing the situation, and I had postponed my wedding and pleaded with some of my would-be guests to readjust their schedules just so they could attend. Well, how do I now call them to inform them that my wedding had been canceled because my husband's a dirty cheater? The shame would be too much to bear, and I went back to Mick's place after a day at the hotel. He had been calling me frantically left and right, and he resumed the whole apology thing by the time I got to his place. His excuse was that he feared he would lose me if he did not comply with my mother's demands. His promise that he was never going to keep in touch with my mom, as she was even suggesting they resume the affair after the marriage. I still loved Mick, and a lot was at stake here. Though I was wounded and he would spend a good amount of time winning back my trust, something that he promised to do, I was not willing to give my mother the satisfaction of ruining my relationship and intended marriage. I accepted to forgive him and move on, but I would need his help in getting back at my mother. So, I told him to not end things with my mom immediately, as I would need to get back to her using his relationship with her to my advantage. So, Mick and I went to see my mom the next day just to remind her that the wedding would be held in 2 days. It was not a reminder, it was a move to set her up. I called my mom to inform her that Mick and I were both coming to her place, and she was really excited. Super excited. We got there and she was busy making subtle flirtatious passes at Mick, and I acted as though I did not notice anything and Mick just played along. Before leaving her place, she said she was aware we were done with the wedding preparation and all, but she still felt compelled to support us financially. She asked Mick to text his account details to her later on so she could send him a mother-in-law's token. I laughed as we left my mother's place. She had never spent a dime on me ever since I knew her to be my mother, but she was willing to send her support as a means of ensuring Mick would not offer any form of resistance, just to continue their affair after the marriage. Mick and I would be going to visit my dad by tomorrow, and I would disclose everything to him. Update number 2. I know my last update was just yesterday, and I'm sorry if this came out too fast, but I just needed to post this ASAP. It is 1 day from my wedding, and Mick and I got home yesterday, and my mother made a transfer of $5,000. Mick did not need to text his account details. She already had it. She would be receiving the greatest shock of her life soon because I won't leave my man for her. The sweetest part would be when she supposed little lover would use, well, revenge. It's going to be my tool. Mick and I went to see my dad in the evening. My dad could readily tell that for a couple who were supposed to get married in less than 24 hours, the chemistry between us was not very strong. The excitement was replaced by tension, and I told my father what my mother had done. As I spoke, he would take a look at Mick, whose head was bowed in shame, and my dad wondered why I still would be willing to go on with the marriage with this man. But I told him I've forgiven him and would not throw my relationship away because my mother was who she was. Well, I told my dad that my reason was coming beyond the affair from my mother. He looked at me with anticipation as I mentioned I came because I wanted to unburden a heavy weight that had rested in my heart all these years. I started by telling him that it was not his fault that my brother died years ago. It was my mother's fault. That statement grabbed the whole of his attention, and even Mick was startled. My dad froze as I told him of how my mother's, practice, that started long before they divorced and not after. I went on to explain to him what happened the day he lost his only son, my father, just with his eyes becoming misty. He had lost half of his property to this woman, paid alimony and child support based on his infidelity, but this was something his wife was equally guilty of. The worst part is that he had been fighting hard all these years to move past the guilt of being responsible for my brother's death, when it was my mom who should have taken the blame. My dad could have strangled my mom if she was present. I could see it in his eyes. I pleaded with him to not act now, till I had enacted my revenge plan on my wedding day, which was in less than 24 hours. Update number 3. This has been 3 days since I officially became a married woman. Much of my happiness, though, is coming from the fact that my revenge has been enacted. My wedding day was great. Everything went as planned. My mother shows up this time, around with any young lover. She probably thought her lover was the one getting married, and the wedding ceremony ended and the reception began. It was the very part I've been waiting for all along. Everyone began wishing Mick and me a happy married life. Everyone, including my mom. She wished me a happy married life when she had plans to share my husband with me, huh? After all is said and done, it's customary for the couple to give their vote of thanks, and Mick started it. He thanked everyone for their massive support and said he was the luckiest guy on earth to marry someone as understanding as me. He then went on to give me the platform to speak. Well, I picked up from where he left off, and I thanked him for coming and apologized for moving the wedding date once again, and I told them the wedding would have happened earlier if my mom had not interfered. The statement threw everyone off balance, and they began looking right at my mother in her eyes, and I went on to tell them about my mom's lifestyle of dating younger guys right from the days when she was married. I explained to them how she had blackmailed Mick into pushing our wedding simply because they once had an affair in the past. That's right. The crowd of people gasped as my mother looked on in horror and shame. I was halfway into my speech when my mother began calling me an ungrateful liar. So, I told the guests there present to not blame my husband for his actions, which were condemnable as I understand his motive for initially playing along was to save his relationship. My mom, well, her little attitude was the first part of what I wanted to say, and you could tell the guests were already had it with her. I delved deeper to expose how my mother had chosen pleasure over the life of my brother and even went as far as pinning the whole thing on my father. There was absolute pandemonium. My mom could not stand the embarrassment, and she could not deny the fact that she had something, well, to do with Mick, as I claimed there was evidence of it. Besides, Mick attested to the things I was saying. His flight ticket to Las Vegas was right there for people to see. I brought it. My mom could not defend herself, and there was no way the people could doubt what I've said. I mean, why would a bride do and say such a thing on her wedding day? My mom ran out of this place as people saw her as a villain. Well, she is. They reacted in disgust when I got to the part about her wanting to continue her affair with my husband after our marriage. I have not heard from my mom ever since. It's not like I'm looking forward to it anyways. Update number 4. Hey guys. This would probably be my final update, as I believe there would not be any drama coming from my mother in the future. She showed up again in my life, and she refused to let me live the happy married life that I so wished for. I started getting various text messages from her about how angry she was that I would disgrace her at my own wedding. My own mother. I did not reply to her messages, and my plan was to just totally ignore her and her messages that carried traces of hate in them. She finally showed up at her home and began creating a scene. She said I was the disgrace to her as a child and would have preferred it if I was the one who had died and not my brother. What a lady. Who was she to talk about me being the perfect example of a child? Was she ever close to the example of what a good mother should look like? I don't think so. She wasn't even sorry about what she's done. She was concerned about her ego. Her comment let out anger I've been hoarding for years. I began throwing insults at her left and right, and, well, that's how it all started with a word exchange. Mick politely asked her to leave, but she began just to demand that we've repaid the money that she's given us to support our wedding preparations, the $5,000. I told her she wasn't getting a dime, as it was payment for the trip that she embarked on with my husband, and I hope she enjoyed it. I asked Mick to throw her out of the house, and he wasted no time. We didn't stop there. We headed straight to the police station where we claimed our lives were in danger. We were immediately granted a restraining order against my mother. My mom's visitation made me feel I had not dealt with her enough. I was glad when my father informed me he was suing my mother for negligence, which led to the death of my younger brother that was pinned on him, and using his infidelity to enrich herself during their divorce proceedings when she was guilty of the same. And now, he has a witness. I'm a key witness in this case, and you can bet your top dollar I would not go easy on my mother. The hearing would be in about a month, and if the case goes in favor of my dad, as I know it will, my mother would spend the rest of her life returning the money that my dad had paid her. She could even end up in jail. That would be great. Well, that's it, guys. Thank you.
Alright, so this is one of the wildest stories I've read in quite some time. Could you guys even imagine being in this situation? Honestly, there were some commenters though that were saying they think that OP went too far. So, I want to ask you guys, what do you think about that unpopular opinion? Do you think that OP went too far and basically she ruined her own wedding by exposing her mother in front of all those people? Do you think that she should have done it separately and privately and just went ahead and told her father and let him handle it? Or do you think no, the mom deserved to have that embarrassment, and also her husband deserved to have way more embarrassment because he got off a little too easy? That's what a lot of commenters were saying, so I want to ask you guys your opinion on that. Drop your thoughts down below. That's going to be all the content for today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more daily videos, the best way is just to subscribe, because I release a story every single day. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.